Back in 2003, when the Hong Kong government first tried to enact national security laws as prescribed by Article 23 of the Hong Kong Basic Law, 500,000 Hong Kong residents took to the streets to voice their concerns about potential encroachment of their fundamental freedoms. At that time, the government withdrew the bill, as the eyes of not only Hong Kong but also of the world were upon it. But the Hong Kong authorities, really the lackeys of Beijing, simply were biding their time for when they could reintroduce it. They did so 2 decades later to a very different outcome as the entire world slept. Earlier this month, on March 8th, the Hong Kong government tabled Article 23 bill before the Legislative Council, or LEGO, and merely 8 days after the end of the so-called consultation period, during which time the government withheld the draft bill from the public. The quote-unquote patriots-only Legislative Council, again filled and pushed by the lackeys of Beijing, rubber-stamped the bill within 10 days, waiving the usual notice period. The law will go into effect tomorrow. This infamous, horrific law goes into effect tomorrow after a process that took a little over 50 days. During these 50 days, there have been no observable opposition voices coming out of Hong Kong. The Hong Kong government would like people to believe that's because there is a public consensus to pass the law. But that's utter nonsense. Nothing could be further from the truth. Civil society has been demolished inside of Hong Kong. Invoking the national security law that took effect in July of 2020, Hong Kong authorities have arrested civil society activists, especially those who provide aid to political prisoners. An independent press has disintegrated due to trumped-up, politically motivated criminal charges. One thinks of the brave Jimmy Lai, the one-time publisher of Apple Daily, standing trial right now in Hong Kong. Jimmy, as we all know, is a rich man. He could have fled Hong Kong, yet he remained, knowing that he would be arrested, as a conscientious witness to press freedom and the abrogation of that press freedom by the Chinese authorities. Indeed, we had his son, Sebastian, testify last May at a hearing that I chaired, and he was unbelievably candid, courageous and strong and articulate, calling for the release of his father, but also for all the others who are being, unfortunately, repressed by the Chinese Communist Party. The political opposition is completely wiped out as well through imprisonment and self-exile. Importantly, the government installed a vetting process by which only compliant candidates are allowed to even run for the chief executive slot or for positions in the legislative branch. As if flipping a switch, the unilaterally imposed national security law destroyed Hong Kong's democratic institutions literally overnight. This dramatic change was in part enabled by the CCP's insidious United Front operations, which seek to co-opt non-party elements of the society to do the Chinese Communist Party's bidding. Like termites that slowly destroy the beams and columns of a building, the CCP's United Front's work has been eroding Hong Kong's societal and political structures even before the handover of 1997. When democratic safeguards become too much of an inconvenience, the Chinese Communist Party pulled the string and the whole building collapsed. What is sad is that we saw all of this coming. Back in 2014, the great Hong Kong barrister and democracy advocate Martin Lee, who I've known for decades, sat in my office where we discussed the concept of the Hong Kong Human Rights and Democracy Act. At that time, the bill, which we then introduced after he left and we put pen to paper, it had only 5 co-sponsors, among which of them was Nancy Pelosi, whom you will hear from momentarily. We were told that the bill was a solution in search of a problem. I couldn't get it marked up in the Foreign Affairs Committee because I was told over and over again, that will never happen. What are you worried about? I said, it could happen, but we need to be as preemptive as we possibly can. And of course, there were too many in the business community who said, obviously, there's no way they're going to let Hong Kong go the way of dictatorship because it's indispensable to business. But they don't know Xi Jinping, and that's part of the whole problem here. He was so misread by the Sino-watchers in this country and around the world, especially at the U.S. Department of State. The situation just kept getting worse and worse. We introduced the Hong Kong Human Rights and Democracy again This time getting 3 more co-sponsors. So now we only had 8 in total. Again, everyone's saying, what are you worried about? We said, we're very worried. And finally, the situation, finally on October 15th, 2019, it was great that it passed, but it was very, very late. We had a breakthrough, and I want to thank the Speaker for making sure this bill came to the floor. I was the sponsor of it with 47 others, and we finally got it onto the floor, and it passed. We had a very, very good debate. It actually passed by a voice vote. That's how uncontroversial it had become. People said, but of course, let's get this into law. The Senate took it up several weeks, months later. Then it went down to the President, and it was signed into law. By then it was too late, though. I reiterate that. It was too late. We had missed an opportunity. The Hong Kong authorities had long since embarked on a path to where we are today, so what can we do? Indeed, the U.S. Congress can act now. It should pass the Hong Kong Economic and Trade Office Certification Act, or HKDC, and the Transnational Repression Policy Act, 2 bills which I've introduced in the House, and Senator Merkley did the same along with Marco Rubio in the United States Senate. Our HKDC bill addresses the fact that Hong Kong economic and trade offices have simply become outposts of the Chinese Communist Party, used to engage in transnational repression of brave Hong Kongers, as 2 of our young yet accomplished activists, who you'll hear from momentarily, Francis Hu and Anna Kwok, can attest to. Francis and Anna, thank you so much for your bravery in the midst of this terrible, terrible repression. At the same time, the U.S. government should continue to robustly oppose the arbitrary enforcement of national laws in Hong Kong, and again protect U.S. citizens and businesses as effectively as possible. So again, I want to thank you all for coming. Tomorrow is going to be another infamous day with this law coming into power, into operation. I'd like to yield to the co-chair of our commission, Senator Merkley. Madam Speaker.
Thank you. Either way, I'm honored to be here with the co-chairs of the commission, Congressman Chris Smith, Mr. Chairman, and co-chair Jeff Merkley, and of course to be here with Francis Hui and Anna Kwok. We'll look forward to hearing from them. Our distinguished chairman laid out the chronology of so many actions that were taken by the Congress in relationship to democracy in Hong Kong. It's so sad. I'm sorry I missed the very beginning, but I do want to commend Chris, because we've been working on this issue for a long time together, along with Frank Wolf, a former member from the Republican side of the aisle, on human rights and China issues. But when we go back, Chris, to the 90s, when there was the transfer of power around 1997, and the promise was they're going to obey the basic law, 1 country, 2 systems. Well, it was just a betrayal, a total betrayal of the people of Hong Kong, and not a good commitment on the part of the Chinese government if they were trying to persuade other people of the validity of 1 country, 2 systems, because it simply was not true. And just when you think you've seen it all, after a series of undemocratic actions on the part of the Chinese Communist Party, they make matters worse. Not only was the security law terrible to begin with, now they've made matters worse. It's almost scary. It's almost scary. Again, it's my privilege to join these leaders in Congress and in Hong Kong democracy here. The so-called national security legislation, quotation marks, national security, is an alarming expansion of Communist Chinese Party assault on freedom in Hong Kong. Make no mistake, national security, again in quotes, is a simple pretext to further criminalize civil rights and suppress pro-democracy voices. We gather here, Democrats and Republicans, House and Senate, for 2 purposes: to condemn the measure unequivocally and to express solidarity with freedom fighters in Hong Kong. Just 4 years after Beijing implemented its oppressive national security law, the Chinese Communist Party obliterated the 1 country, 2 systems. That tragic demolition of that continues. At the same time, Beijing accelerates its campaign to obliterate human rights, including other Uyghurs, and of course in Tibet. Not a good signal to send to the people of Taiwan if you want to convince them of 1 country, 2 systems. here's the thing. As Chris said, the business community has weighed in that this and this is going to happen. And of course, it hasn't. And I always say, if we fail to speak out for human rights violations in China because of commercial interest, we lose all moral authority to speak out against human rights violations any place in the world. And again, Chris Smith and Chairman Smith laid out so much of what we have done here in a bipartisan, bicameral way, House and Senate, Democrats and Republicans. But in his closing remarks there, he talked about transnational aggression on repression on the part of the Chinese. It's very dangerous, reaching into London, reaching into our own country, reaching into other countries with the threat that they pose. So again, strengthened by the heroism of civil rights leaders like those with us today. I've worked with Martin Lee since the day I came to Congress, and that was a long time ago. But certainly after Tiananmen Square and all the visibility that gave to human rights violations. When I was on my way to Tiananmen Square to unfurl a banner in support of the people who spoke out for democracy, gave their lives in Tiananmen Square, the banner we unfurled was given to us by Martin Lee and the pro-democracy advocates and leaders in Hong Kong. So our relationships there go back a long way, don't they, Chris? So again, it's my privilege now to yield back to Chris Smith, but I think maybe I should be yielding to the distinguished co-chair of the commission. Thank you, Senator Merkley, for your leadership, the Congressional Executive Commission on China, which we were very proud to establish, and again, under Democratic and Republican speakers, to be able to bring legislation to the floor. Thank you for your leadership in the Senate on all of this, Senator Merkley. Welcome to the House side.
Thank you so much. Thank you. We are gathered here today at this moment with rights champions like Anna Kwok, like Francis Lee, to draw attention to the fact that this very moment China is bringing down the Article 23 national security legislation to crush the rights of the people in Hong Kong. We must continue to draw attention to this proceeding process in which the vision from 1997 has been violated. It was in that year that Britain and Hong Kong reached an agreement for 50 years, agreement for genuine autonomy, an agreement to preserve the political system of the people of Hong Kong. But then 2014, yellow umbrella movement, where we saw it all around the world because China started to say, it will not be the people of Hong Kong who will choose the leaders of Hong Kong, it will be China. And the protests were fierce and furious, but China continued to try to break the deal that they had made with Britain to protect the freedom in Hong Kong. And then we go to 2019, when 2 million people were on the street on June 16th, demonstration after demonstration. And all of this over the extradition power, knowing that once people could be swept off the street and taken to China, freedom was going to be in short supply. So there we have it, step by step. Freedom is being crushed. And the provisions that are going to affect, as we stand here today, make a bad situation so much worse. That China can prosecute virtually all activities that they dislike. The pretext of state secrets, the pretext of external interference. It erodes the rule of law, it undermines human rights, and it extends the long arm of authoritarianism. As a co-chair of the Congressional Executive Commission on China, I believed in 2019, and I believe now, as a nation built on the ideals of freedom and democracy, we have a responsibility to speak up and stand up for those fighting for the same ideals for Hong Kong. The CECC sent a letter to Senator Blinken urging him to protect American citizens and business and to raise the alarm. In 2019, we passed the Hong Kong Human Rights and Democracy Act. And thank you, Chairman Smith, and all those who stood with you to make this happen. Thank you, Speaker Pelosi. But we cannot stop there. There's so much more we could do. We could pass the Transnational Repression Policy Act that I've been championing in the Senate. China threatens the family members of those who speak up in the United States. This is not just a direct attack on the family members back home, it's a direct attack on our freedoms here in America. It's absolutely 1,000% unacceptable, and we need to pass the Transnational Repression Policy Act. We need to pass the Hong Kong Judicial Sanctions Act to require the administration to review which Hong Kong officials should be sanctioned. And we need to pass the Hong Kong Economic and Trade Office Certification Act to stop the Communist Party of China from spreading propaganda or surveilling democracy advocates. We must not forget the people of Hong Kong who have so validly protested to preserve their system of freedom. Let us continue in the fight in partnership with them, alongside champions like those who are with us today, to stand for the principles of freedom of speech, freedom of assembly, freedom of self-government that we so much cherish. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Smith. Thank you so very much, Senator. It is now an honor to introduce Anna and Francis. These are two women who, sadly, the Chinese Communist Party has literally put bounties on their heads. Talk about transnational aggression. They are the example of what is done. I look at Rushan Abbas over here, who is a Uyghur, and she's suffering the same indignity at the hands of the Chinese Communist Party. So I want to welcome them. And again, this press conference is about what's happening tomorrow. You know, injustice need not be forever, and we need to speak out boldly for the day when this tyranny of Xi Jinping ends. But these are two of the women who are just so courageous, articulate, and we rally around them, not only their safety, but their message.
Speaker Emerita Pelosi, Chairman Smith of the CCC, and Co-Chairman Merkley of the CCC, thank you for always standing by Hong Kong in moments of need for the past few decades. 22 years ago, Article 23 was first introduced in 2002 in Hong Kong to initiate the Chinese Communist Party's campaign to completely eliminate Hong Kong's already limited autonomy. In 2003, 500,000 Hong Kongers marched on the streets of Hong Kong and successfully opposed the passing of Article 23. That was a moment of political awakening for generations of Hong Kongers. It was also my first realization of Hong Kong's political reality when I was only 6 years old at the time. Today, I stand here in front of the US Capitol as a person wanted by the Hong Kong government with a 1 million Hong Kong dollar bounty on my head. I stand here in public to oppose the article because I refuse to succumb to the fears that the government wants us to feel. I refuse to accept that this will be the fate set in stone for Hong Kong and Hong Kongers for decades to come. With Article 23 enacted in the past hour, Hong Kongers are still persisting in the dark. We are overcoming fears, accepting the sacrifices we will have to make, and burdening the threats of transnational repression as we continue to fight for freedom and democracy in the world. We have also released a joint statement just now, having 145 organizations around the world joining us to oppose Article 23 in public. It is crucial for the United States to stand with Hong Kong at this moment. We have to reject the global expansion of Chinese Communist Party's authoritarianism. I urge the Biden administration to utilize their power to help Hong Kongers as soon as possible, offer P2 and TPS statuses for Hong Kongers, sanction human rights abusers responsible for the situation Hong Kong is caught in. I also urge the Congress behind me in this very moment to pass the Hong Kong Economic and Trade Office Certification Act as soon as possible. Also the Transnational Repression Policy Act. Last but not least, remember the 1,835 political prisoners in Hong Kong. Their sacrifices and voices must not be forgotten. If Hong Kongers want freedoms, we must fight to get it. Do not succumb to your sense of fear. 唔好俾恐懼蠶食. Keep organizing. Contact your Congress officers and contact your representatives about our policy demands. Keep fighting until we see the Hong Kong we wish to live in safely and freely one day. 光復香港，時代革命. Liberate Hong Kong, revolution of our times. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman Smith. Thank you, Chairman Merkley and Speaker Pelosi for all of your relentless work on Hong Kong and China. And thank you all for showing up today. This Monday, I was talking to Piero Toxi from CECC. I told him the Article 23 legislation is going to pass tomorrow. We need to do something to respond to this. And we were so certain about this that it is going to pass quickly through the Legislative Council because Hong Kong government has basically rooted out all opposition from the council and from civil society. And a few hours after that, it came true. From the day of the public consultation started to the bill passage, it only took 1.5 months. And now it is implemented in Hong Kong. The government really put a full force to efforts to rebuke any opposition against this bill by threatening us. Last week, my organization, the Committee for Freedom in Hong Kong Foundation, and I myself was called out about 2 times by the Hong Kong government for calling for sanctions against responsible officials and expressing concerns over religious freedom under this new law. And we were not the only ones targeted. What's interesting is that all of these people and organizations that are being called out, they're all out of Hong Kong. Why is that? It's not because everyone in the city loves what the bill does. It's because no one dares to speak up against the bill. No one feels safe and comfortable to make any post online or say anything to risk being arrested under the national security law that has already put hundreds of people in jail simply for standing up against the regime. The purpose of this new law is to crush the only bit of freedom left in Hong Kong by extending sentences and expanding the definition of national security crimes. A person can be jailed for up to 10 years simply for talking to me and Anna or anyone who's speaking here that is considered a foreign force. The law undermines due process and also puts every single one of us here at risk by intensifying transnational repression. I still remember back in the days when I was in Hong Kong as a student, I would protest in school uniforms, campaigning in the streets every single weekend, debating with friends what's the best way to achieve democracy in Hong Kong for Hong Kongers. The 15-year-old me would never have imagined that Hong Kong would become so different today, where saying or thinking about democracy could be a crime that gets up to life imprisonment. And yet I'm standing right here as a political asylee with $1 million Hong Kong dollar bounty on my head for simply doing the exact same thing and exercising the rights that is protected under the basic law from the day I was born. And would I have imagined that all of my friends would be imprisoned or forced to leave home? No, absolutely not. But then currently, as Anna just said, there are over 1,800 political prisoners in Hong Kong, and the new law will be even more repressive, threatening more individuals and even businesses and organizations in Hong Kong. A little over a year ago, I was standing right here for another press conference to mark the 2nd anniversary of the Hong Kong 47 charge. At that time, I called the US to step up its efforts to safeguard freedom in Hong Kong and hold the CCP and Hong Kong authorities to account. Now, 1 year has passed, and still this Congress has not passed any legislation to hold the Hong Kong government accountable. And still, this government has not issued any sanctions on anyone in response to the situation in Hong Kong. Today, the 47 has been in trial and pretrial detention for over 1,100 days. And under this new law, they might be continued to get charged and be kept in jail. These people are not heroes far from reach. They are our friends, some of whom I grew up with and fought along with in the past. They are just like many of us who long for freedom, defend for freedom and human rights at home. So it's important for me to say this here. Hong Kong is not dead. I need to underscore that because many people in Hong Kong continue to resist in their own way, and they're looking at us, asking us to use our power, our resources, our platform, our freedom to speak up for them. And therefore, it is time for the United States to step up for them, to advocate for them and the freedom in Hong Kong. And every time we let authoritarian get away with their atrocities, we risk another bad actors attempting to do the same. And that's why it is important that we hold the CCP accountable for what they're doing in Hong Kong, in China, in Tibet, in East Turkestan, in Taiwan, and even here in the US. We need to send a message to Beijing and the world that there is no place in this world for human rights violators like the CCP. For that, I echo what the co-chairs have said, what Anna has just said. We specifically asked the Biden administration to impose sanctions on individuals who are responsible for undermining the rule of law in Hong Kong, and in particular, those who participated in the passage of legislation. Also, offer safe haven in the US to freedom fighters in Hong Kong and revoke the privileges and immunities of the Hong Kong Economic and Trade Offices in the US. I also encourage everyone to visit callforhk.us, which now has a new campaign supported by both the CFHK and HKDC to ask your senator and representatives to take action and pass legislation on Hong Kong immediately in light of the Article 23 legislation. This could be the last chance for the US and international community to really get something done and to safeguard freedom in Hong Kong, to support the people of Hong Kong. And we really need every single one of your help to join us. We count on you, they count on us, and we can only do this together. Thank you very much.
Francis, thank you very much, and thank you. Are there any questions from the press? Yes, sir.
How is the lack of opposition in Hong Kong shows that how repressive this national security law in 2020 is, and what is it going to look like in the coming years after this new Article 23?
I'll be happy to answer, but I'd like to invite our just Anna or Francis if they would as well. But it does underscore that they are destroying through incarceration, as well as the chilling effect that this repression is having. There are people who are still profoundly opposed to what the government is doing, but they know if they speak up, they will be in jail. And now, with this new iteration of the law, this new expansion of the law, it makes it even more dangerous for them. That's why, and Francis and Anna both made this appeal, the administration has the authority right now to single out even more of these officials in Hong Kong and in Beijing who are doing this terrible human rights abuse, and single them out by name and sanction them. You know, we need a whole new wave of sanctions coming from the administration. Yes, we have bipartisan bills. I'm the sponsor of some. My good friend Senator Merkley has sponsored others. Yes, we need to pass those. Yesterday we were supposed to mark up the HKDC bill. It got pulled inexplicably from the markup, but it will be marked up in the Foreign Affairs Committee. We need new laws, no doubt about it. But we have existing statutes that are filled to overflowing with provisions empowering the administration to take action right now. Finally, I was disgusted, frankly, at the APEC summit when many of our businessmen flocked to and paid huge amounts of money to talk to Xi Jinping. Did any of them raise human rights abuse with him and with his entourage? Did any of them bring up Hong Kong? I doubt it. As a matter of fact, that's been the story of many in corporate America going way back when we fought against most favored nation status being delinked from human rights when Bill Clinton did it back in 1994. Totally severed human rights from trade. May 26, 1994, an infamous day for the people of China, including Hong Kong. So this president, Secretary Blinken, they have huge numbers of options available to them. Sanctioning is one of them, and we hope that they will do it. And again, not to belabor the point, but at that APEC summit, when many of the diaspora were there protesting, coordinated by the HKDC in San Francisco, the Chinese government organized countermeasures that were violent, and who's been held to account? Who? So we need to get our strength and our courage and our backbone and speak truth to power to this gross violation of human rights.
Do you mind repeating the question?
Sure, yeah. How has rights, like the lack of opposition to this in Hong Kong, how has that shown that the security law in 2020, how it's impacted today? And then how is Article 23 going to impact further rights? And specifically, I'd like to know about religious rights. Are the religious believers in China who are persecuted, are the religious believers the same ones in Hong Kong, like Christians in Falun Gong? Are they also going to experience the same kind of persecution?
I'll answer first part of the question and leave the second part to Francis. For national security law enacted in 2020, of course it impacted in a way that this time during the Article 23 public consultation, which is for show by the government, most Hong Kongers did not write a submission for fears of repercussions. And of course the Hong Kong government once again approved that there would be repercussions because, for example, for my organization, CFHA, and other organizations around the world who made a submission, all our organizations were called anti-China and were all dismissed by the Hong Kong government. But still, Hong Kongers like Chow Hang Tong, who is currently in jail, actually wrote her own submission in jail overnight just to state her opposition against the Hong Kong government. But even though the situation has gotten so dire and Hong Kong people are still persisting, we need a lot of actions from the US government to actually tell the Hong Kong government to stop doing these human rights violations and abuses so blatantly. We have not heard from the US Biden administration about what they are actually going to do. As the chairman has said, there are plenty of options available, whether it's sanctions, it's providing Hong Kongers TPS or P2. There are a number of options that would help Hong Kong human rights defenders and to protect human rights defenders who are on American soil as well, but none has been done yet. So our question is, when are they going to do something? And how bad does it have to be for the US government and the US Congress to swiftly act in Hong Kong? Once we miss this window of Article 23, we don't know when the next time we'll hear Hong Kong on the international news again. And that's why we're really trying every single ounce of energy and resources we have to help people of Hong Kong to make sure that their human rights will not be further repressed. It's already really repressed, but we hope that the situation will not get worse for Hong Kongers around the world. Yeah, I'll pass.
I would just talk a bit on the religious freedom part. So there are two ways that the Article 23 legislation is going to violate religious freedom and really threaten the freedom for people to practice their faith freely and without fear. First is the imposition of the extraterritorial interference. They actually prohibited any kind of foreign forces in Hong Kong that are deemed violating or that is deemed as a threat in national security. And we don't know how this is going to apply to other states, but the Vatican can be considered a foreign state. And so the question is, now the Catholic dioceses in Hong Kong that are connected with the Vatican and acting as a bridge church for China, between China and Vatican and the international community, that's the Catholic dioceses have to cut off their ties with the Vatican and be part of the Patriotic Association in China. That's a question that the Catholic diocese in Hong Kong failed to answer and the government has failed to answer. And the second part is about the seal of confession. Actually, in the law, a priest can be put in jail for up to 14 years in jail if they fail to disclose any information about a person violating the law. But we know that it's a strict rule in church that clergy do not expose any information or knowledge that they learn from confessions. So this is another type of violation of freedom of speech. And again, the government failed to answer the questions whether it would be a violation or whether priests would be held accountable under this law. And so I recommend everyone to look at actually in January this year, we published a report titled Hostile Takeover, the CCP and the Hong Kong Religious Communities. And in it, I lay out a lot of the threats that religious communities in Hong Kong are facing under the Beijing sinicization campaign. And it's all throughout education and threatening persons of faith that are currently sitting in jail. And we suspect that Article 23 and the national security law will continue to deteriorate freedom of speech, including religious freedom. And I am afraid that the future of the religious communities would really be at stake, and this is something that everyone should pay attention and should be concerned about.
Just so I correct the record, the HKDC bill was supposed to be on the floor this week. We did have a robust debate in House Foreign Affairs Committee. It was totally bipartisan, and for inexplicable reasons, it was pulled from the roster or from the listing of bills this week. So we're going to be pushing to get it on as soon as we come back after this recess. We're joined by Elmer Yuen, who also has a bounty on his head, and I'm so glad he's here and courageous to speak out.
Thank you, Chris. The Article 23 is not only bad, it's illegal. It's illegal by UN standard. If you look at the Declaration of Human Rights, it's absolutely against UN, and China is a signatory to the UN chapter. And also it's illegal to the Chinese Constitution and the Hong Kong Basic Law. There's no point in arguing the details of the law. The law itself wasn't done right. It's never went through the proper legislation or with the people's mandates. The Hong Kong Legislative Council is all hand-picked. It's not elected. It's illegal. The whole government in Hong Kong needs to be replaced by Hong Kong people, Hong Kong elected people, not by the Communist Party. That's what I want to say. So we have to grow up. It's time to grow up. We thank the U.S. Congress and the U.S. government very much for their past help. But it's time we also must grow up and do something ourselves. Get organized, not crying every day. There's no use crying. There's no use complaining. In order for us to return to Hong Kong, we must get rid of the CCP once and for all. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions? Yes, right there.
RFA Cantonese, I have 3 questions. The first one specifically for you, Representative. So many American businesses operating in Hong Kong and their employees have been expressing a lot of concerns about Article 23. So what are your responses to that? What do you advise American businesses in Hong Kong to do? Should they divest from Hong Kong?
Bottom line is I think they should seriously consider it rather than find themselves behind bars, and especially the Hong Kongers who might be working within their company, who are an easier target for the Chinese Communist Party. I would hope, again, and this is an appeal to the President, do something, Mr. President. You have the authority. And there's been a great deal of silence down the other end of town. We're doing more laws. That bill will be up. HKDC will be up very shortly. It's supposed to be up this week on the floor of the House, and I do believe it will pass in the Senate. We're trying, but the law is already there on the books. Enforce it. And that's called prioritization. That's called having the political will to figure out here's who the perpetrators of these crimes are. And we're going to hold them to account. We've got so many authorities that the president has, including Global Magnitsky, and I was the House sponsor of that law to make sure that their ability to get a visa and to do business here, they who commit these crimes, is ended, and it does work. So just we've got to make it a priority. It can't be business as usual, and this new manifestation of tyranny needs to be met with a response that is real. And not business as usual. It just can't be anymore. You had a question?
Yeah, the second and the third questions are open to the floor. So the officials responsible for passing Article 23 and also the LegCo member, they have already indicated to the Hong Kong reporters that they have moved their assets out of the U.S. and they have no plans in the near future to visit Hong Kong. And they also self-declare, a lot of them, that they don't have any assets in the U.S. So if there are coming sanctions from the Congress, do you think the intimidation effect will minimize? And would the Congress or the U.S. government thinking about a bigger stake or maybe some carrots to change the Chinese government behavior? The third question is, the previous sanctions, we can see that after the U.S. government announcing previous sanctions, the pressure that the average Jane and Joe in Hong Kong face are even greater. There have been more arrests and there have been harsher sentences. So I want anyone from the floor to respond. So what would your recommendation for the average everyday people, how should they prepare if Washington is thinking about further sanctions against the Hong Kong government and Beijing officials? Thank you.
Well, I think we have just said, actually, for the past 2.5 years, the Hong Kong community, along with our allies in Congress, has been pushing for sanctions against officials that are responsible for the crackdown in Hong Kong. That includes the officials in the administration and judges and prosecutors that are residing in all these national security cases. And there are actually 49 of them that are already listed under the Hong Kong Sanction Act, which we have worked with many congressional offices to get introduced last year. So I think right now it's not a matter of who we're sanctioning, but a matter that we need actions from the U.S. to really impose sanctions to hold the CCP and Hong Kong authorities to account. And we urge the administration to really look at the letters that we have given to them, the many letters that the civil society have given to them, and letters that CECC and the Select Committee on CCP has also given to them. There are actually a list of names that they can take reference of, and we urge the administration to take actions on that. And I also want to stress that even if the lawmakers have already, pull out all of their money out from their, American banks, they are still affected by the American financial system. So we're talking about, Visa, MasterCard, or Apple Pay, or any kind of things. They could still be affected as long as they're using American financial system in their daily banking. So we still think that there is a need for consequences that are made for their crackdown, for their responsible for the crackdown in Hong Kong and violating human rights in Hong Kong, ruining and deteriorating the rule of law in Hong Kong.
Let me just add, the greatest mistake the United States government made was under Bill Clinton when he delinked human rights from trade, most favored nation status. And then he was joined by both Democrats and Republicans throughout the rest of the 1990s in getting it to a permanent normal trading where we don't even do an annual review, which we used to do under MFN. I've introduced legislation that would reimpose human rights conditionality on our trading relationship. I think it's an idea whose time has come. We need to be very serious and say, you're an exporting economy, and if you want to continue exporting to the United States, you have to stop using slave labor. You have to stop oppressing the people of Hong Kong, the Uyghurs, where Xi Jinping is literally committing genocide as we meet. I mean, we're talking about a pariah state. Some of you may have followed the Universal Periodic Review at the United Nations Human Rights Council. There were some very good questions, but the Chinese government gamed that so badly. I chaired a hearing on it after the fact to point this out, by reducing what everyone got to say to about 45 seconds. Are you kidding me? It's about time the UN stepped up aggressively, which they have not done. I mean, we're talking about monstrous behavior. People being tortured, being put into prison. We know that the use of torture is pervasive throughout all of China. UN rapporteurs have found that over and over again, including Manfred Nowak several years back. To just say, oh, let's just trade some more. That's why I call on our own business community to stop their enabling of dictatorship and stand with the oppressed and not the oppressor. So my bill would do just that. I have another bill. Everyone's talking about cobalt and how necessary it is for EVs. And we're going to get a vote on this hopefully very soon. I introduced legislation that said all of the slave labor in the DR Congo that is mining cobalt, all of it heads over to China where it's processed, then it comes back here in Teslas. The entire trade of cobalt and the EVs is now predicated on a tainted supply chain. That has to end. Our bill, just like the Uyghur Forced Labor Act, would provide a presumption of guilt, which they could rebut, a rebuttable presumption that is coming from those mines. And I've had 3 hearings on that, one of them this week, pointing out the monstrous behavior of taking little kids in Africa and putting them into mines, 35,000 or more every year. Many of them are dying. Many of them are getting sick, and about 200,000 of their parents. All of the processing of that cobalt is shipped to China, and then it comes back here in EVs. Well, if you want an EV, you better check under the hood and find out what the source of that was. And nowadays, it's DR Congo via China. And so that's another area. We need a multi-pronged effort to hold China to account.
Any other questions?
Thank you for the question.
Questions for anybody? Anybody else?
The transnational, the policy action. Can you give us an update on the status of that bill?
Both bills are very seriously being considered by the Foreign Relations and the Foreign Affairs Committee, and we're hoping, I've asked repeatedly, that be brought to a vote. My hope is it will. It's absolutely an idea whose time has come as well. Here's the living proof of it. People with bounties on their heads, and there's so many others, and it's not a new phenomenon, it's just getting worse. I remember when so many of the people like Rabia Kadir and others were complaining about the Chinese following them and interrupting them and doing things that raise questions about their safety. Well, now it's become very, very pervasive, and again, the Chinese Communist Party excels at intimidation. So we've got to hold them to account in every way possible. Our FBI has become more robust in making this a priority. And that's one of the things the legislation will enable. Thank you.
Anybody else from the press? Thank you, everybody. You'll be available for individual interviews right after this if you want to set that up. Thank you.
With you.